Hey, all, welcome to Oddly Successful, a podcast that celebrates people who followed their instincts, went against the grain, and found success outside of the traditional 9 to 5. I am your host, Alexander Lefero-Dietrich, and as always, I want to remind you that you can find us on Instagram and YouTube by searching Oddly Successful. In today's episode, we are interviewing Shannon Johnson, who has a really colorful journey. Today, she is a marketing consultant and a commercial and residential realtor, on top of being the most important job, a wife and a mother of two. And she has lived everywhere. I won't get into that yet. I want you to expound on that. But yeah, you just this really go-getter of a person who seems to have done a little bit of everything in a little bit of everywhere. So let's start there. Like, where specifically did you start this journey of that led you into becoming a marketing consultant?
Well, so I will, by the way, thank you for having me. I'm so happy.
Oh yeah, you bet. I always dive into this just like, well, tell me everything. But yeah.
I would like to say I'm going to quote someone, and I don't remember who told me this. I used to always say I bounced around a lot.
Mhm.
Then I met this wonderful person who was like, "You've had many careers." I was like, "Yeah, I like that much better. It's a little more positive."
Yeah.
So I would say I really got started. I thought I was going to be a professional model. I
Mm.
actually started modeling when I was in middle school. So, I started being paid to model and also act, and it wasn't big time. I wasn't like this supermodel. Okay. I'm only 5'7". So, so it wasn't like this big career, but I was being paid, very early in my life. I was
Mhm.
doing things like dinner theaters for acting and things like that. So I think I got this
Nice.
bug of just always wanting to do something interesting.
Mhm.
And then the movement of just all the different places that I've been. My dad was in the army, but then he was going from the army into more traditional life. And each of me and my brothers were all born in a different state. So we were
Mhm.
always moving. So
Yeah.
for me, sitting still and being in one place is a little bit like, okay, I'm bored now, I'm ready to go,
Yeah.
ready to try something new. But I would say the marketing really started. I built my career in New York City. So
Mhm.
born in Hampton, Virginia, moved to Cambridge, Massachusetts, back to Hampton for a little bit of time. Raleigh, North Carolina is my home, and I also say that New York City is my home.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
now reside where you do in Richmond, Virginia. But
Yeah.
so I would say that the marketing piece of it really started when I went from my fashion. I went into event planning, and I wanted to be one of those who was planning fashion shows and producing fashion shows for Seventh on
Mhm.
Six. Seventh on Six is Fashion Week in New York City, and I
Oh
did
wow.
that,
Okay.
and it was wonderful. And I
Yeah.
really knew I was going to be a fashion girl. Unfortunately, I didn't like the fashion industry. I remember coming home to my
Mm.
boyfriend, who's my now husband, and I was
Yeah.
like, "Is there any way to be in this industry without being around any of these people?" And he's like, "Yeah, I don't think that's gonna work out."
Yeah.
I kind of transitioned and started planning events for Macy's, opening stores for Macy's, and doing celebrity launches. And Macy's was such a wonderful foundation because you had to do everything. I'm talking about very detailed. I was sometime managing 150 people at one time, if not more.
Mhm.
The store launch was huge. I mean, you've been to a Macy's store. The
Yeah.
ones in New York City are huge, right?
Yep.
So
Yeah.
then I launched one in Puerto Rico. So it was just like a lot of moving parts. We had to make sure people were attending. We had to do our own marketing. We had to do all these things. And by the way, that was before social media. I'm dating myself. So it wasn't like this, plug. Yeah, right. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
so it wasn't this plug and play. We had to like really do the work and figure out how to like get the word out. Not
Yeah.
that you don't have to do the work on social media. But
Yeah.
anyway, so it really started then. So really a long time ago, since I just now fully dated myself. Back in the 90s, back in the good old 90s.
Well, okay, so like I was a '90s kid. I mean, like I was born in '92, so I have it wasn't a lot, but I do remember the pre-social media era because I think Facebook came out. I want to
2007,
say I was
2008.
yeah, like I was just in high school when it came out. We were using MySpace
Yeah.
before then. Still remember you, Tom. Um, but uh, But what was, I guess, like, being a marketer and having to reach all those crowds of people, but having to do it in person, like I would argue, is social. Like that is
It is.
social versus social media, which, there is an element of social to it, but, you can kind of do, I'm not sure, but it seems like you could do the marketing without the in-person social aspect to it. Like, what have you learned pre-social media as a marketer, as a brand consultant? And then how does that translate now into where people are relying so heavily on social
My goodness, I'll tell you, I have a love-hate relationship with social media because obviously we know the power. I mean, it's really, you can
media?
do things, you can reach an audience, and now it's like at a fraction of a cost of what you used to have to, spend money on. So I do have a love relationship with it. Hate is mainly because of what I learned is that's
Yeah.
kind of gone face to face. I feel like there's just nothing better than that, right? What
Mhm.
I was taught, and even though I moved into brand and marketing, I want to give a wonderful nod. I started off as an event planner, and that is
Mhm.
something that I continue to do. It's the thing that I can probably do the best with my hands tied behind my back. So I love it. I was
Yeah.
an event planner, and then I went into wedding planning. So it
Mhm.
was just a wonderful career. But when you had this face to face, you had to read people to see what should be happening. You had to
Yeah.
be very cool and calm and collected, but you really had to be watching the audience. And you had
Mhm.
to be very meticulous about, all right, are their faces changing? Are people disconnected? Is something going on? Is there a sound that they're hearing that's causing them not to pay attention to what's going on that I need to address very quickly? Is it someone in the back talking, or is there something
Mhm.
going on with the AV system? And then moving and taking care of that in a really fast way without distracting what's happening. And
Yeah.
so I would say the attention to details. It's just
Okay.
how, and that's something in marketing. You have to be able to look at all of the details from a very broad perspective, but also, you have to be in the weeds. And that was something
Mhm.
that I would say I learned from my event planning.
Well, I can only imagine as you're saying this, like I imagine it would take an insane amount of confidence to do that, especially reading people, right? One of the things that I struggle with sometimes is I put my own voice
Yeah.
onto people's faces, onto their expressions, and sometimes it can be overly critical, or sometimes it can be overly positive, right? But I think being very grounded in yourself and trying to read people objectively as best as you can takes an insane amount of confidence. And it sounds like you had done so much prior, again, moving around so much, doing the event planning, doing the like from the Macy's to the modeling to all that stuff. Do you think the constant change and flux in your life had made you adaptable to take on, those types of roles?
Now that you ask that, probably so. Probably so.
Mhm.
I think that I give a nod to my parents to I can be in any environment with any type of people, and I never feel like I'm not supposed to be there. Right.
Yeah.
So I've always been very comfortable in my skin. I don't know where that came from, but I'm very happy that I have it. But I
Hmm.
think that the confidence that you're speaking of, I mean, we're human beings, so all of us lack confidence in some way, right? About
Hmm.
something. We always feel like an imposter in some way. And I'm
Hmm.
sure I have felt that way at every step in my life. I think at that point, the confidence came from I knew that if I stuck to my plan, I was going to execute a flawless event, right?
Hmm.
And part
Yeah.
of sticking, so the confidence was in just knowing that I know what I'm doing, I know what needs to be happening, and I'm aware of every piece of what needs to be happening, right?
Hmm.
So I'm aware of the talent who's coming down the runway if it was a fashion show. I'm aware of what's happening backstage. I'm listening to all the things that's going on in my walkie-talkie while also paying attention to the audience. So
Yeah.
it's just, it's just that ability to be able to be very aware. The thing about social media that I feel has taken people away from that is that we're just so focused on this one thing and we're losing
Mm.
the awareness of what's around us.
Yeah.
And I sometimes say to my kids, I'm just like, look up. There's a beautiful world out there. So
Yeah.
I think that's the piece of kind of hate that I have with social media is it's made us
Hmm.
just focus on something that's not really real because a lot of
Yeah.
this on there isn't. And we very, very rarely just like focus about like what's around us and we're very rarely
Hmm.
present in the moment. And when you're an event planner and a marketer, you have to be very present in what you're doing or you will miss what's going on.
Yeah, well, I feel like, I mean, just from a product management point of view, from my background, I always think about how did these technologies originate? Like, what was their intent? And I can imagine, being somebody on the forefront of social media outside one day and be like, there's all this really cool stuff happening. And wouldn't it be great to repeat it and share it with my friends who aren't here? Which is this really beautiful, uh, ethos to build a product, right? And so they build it, and that's what people originally use it for. Like, again, I remember when Facebook came out, and it's just like, oh my gosh, my uncle's like 15 states away, and I can talk to him whenever I want now. That's so cool.
Really cool.
But then eventually, like, now you get away from that holistic, and it's like, oh well, having things to share with people, that's what makes my social media successful. And so you begin to manufacture
Yeah.
some of these things, right? And it loses that holisticness that I think that you were touching on.
Yeah. Yeah. I think with that, we all get caught up in it, in this new technology. And listen, this type of technology is great. I feel like it's moving a lot faster than we are. So sometimes it's a
Yeah.
little bit scary. But I
Hmm.
feel like, I mean, before I got onto Facebook, and I was a late adapter, I was one of those who was like, I'm not doing it. And I was in the industry, and I loved even with advertising, I loved how you were able to do this geo targeting. You were
Yeah.
able to actually really specify, like, be more targeted in who you were reaching. That was wonderful for me sitting in my seat as a marketer and someone who was
Yeah.
placing advertising.
Yeah.
When I was on the receiving end, I was like, oh, this is creepy. Phone is probably listening to us right now. When we finish recording this, I'm going to get some sponsored ad on Instagram, right?
Oh yeah.
Like a podcast. I don't know, whatever it is.
Yep.
But I mean, so it's a little bit creepy, but I think my thing is that we just have to remind ourselves that sharing on social media is one step. Don't not call your uncle, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's not, it doesn't replace the human connection of him being able to hear your voice. And I think that's what
Hmm.
we have to just remind ourselves. It's like, all right, this is a piece of it, but we still
Hmm.
have to engage in human beings, like just eye to eye. Matter of fact, when you and I had coffee just recently, let
Yeah.
me tell you guys something about Alex. So we were having coffee just recently, and I loved how you decided to sit right beside me and turn your chair to me. And it immediately was a very like welcoming kind of like, oh, we're just gonna sit and have like he's gonna make me feel safe to have any conversation I want to have. And so just those little things are just, and I know now we're getting into like relationship, whatever. But I think that was just, it was so small, but it was so big, that gesture, because it kind of gave me the opening of like, oh, I can relax. I can have a safe and open conversation with this gentleman. And it just was like, and we did. We had just
Thank you. Thank you
that.
so much. Appreciate you. Well, I mean, it makes me wonder too that this idea, like you'd mentioned, maintaining your authenticity
Yes.
through all of this, and there had been ups and downs. I'm starting to see like these themes tied together about the authenticity of social media, it being a tool to serve us, but then also the authenticity of you having to be who you were unapologetically throughout these various stages in your career. Do you have any highlights of somewhere you're like, I was nailing it, like this is who I was, I felt great, versus, I mean, were there any times you're like, I am actually not who I feel that I am, and what did that feel like?
Oh man. I think that's happened, both have happened a few different times.
Hmm.
I would say being on this side, I am right at the border, knocking on 50. And I've, again, had a very colorful career, and I've been really blessed to have a lot of different careers. I would say there were many times where I stayed somewhere a bit too long, right? And we
Mm.
all know it. We all know
Yep.
we have that feeling where we're
Hmm.
just like, either you're just not passionate about it anymore, or you
Yeah.
wake up kind of putting on the face. You literally forget makeup and doing your hair, right? But you've
Hmm.
literally got to like put that face on before you walk into that office or that place of business.
Hmm.
I think there were a couple of times. I would say one, which I was really proud about, I talked about the fashion industry. I mean, when I
Yep.
tell you I thought everything in my life was going to be about fashion. I mean, I literally was just like, I was modeling. I wanted to go into fashion show production. All the
Hmm.
books that I read were about fashion. I went to New York City just to pursue a fashion career. So when I
Yeah.
got there and I found myself being around, and it wasn't, I'm not going to say that I was around a lot of drugs, but I definitely was around people who were using it a lot easier than I wanted to, be around.
Yep.
It was just unhealthy. Let me just say that.
Hmm.
Right. And then I found myself, and I was probably 25 pounds skinnier, and I found myself just constantly looking at everyone around me, wanting to be smaller. There was a point where I started smoking cigarettes because I was so stressed out. And I'm like, and no, not knocking anyone who does that, but that is just not my thing. And
Yeah.
it was really crazy enough. It was actually me looking across the bar in New York City, and it was this beautiful girl. I'm talking about like beautiful. And I'm looking at her, and then a couple of seconds later, I could tell that she had taken something because she went from being beautiful to just being just trashy, And
Yep.
I'm watching this on the other side, and I was like, wow, okay, yeah, I think I'm good. And at that point, I just wasn't mature enough to be able
Hmm.
to be in that industry and maintain who I was. If I was in that
Hmm.
industry now, I probably would be around that. And I was very proud that I moved out of it. And I left
Yeah.
the industry. When I tell you, I thought that I was going to be a fashion girl for life, but I was like, I'm not sure I'm going to like myself if I stay in
Hmm.
this industry. So I think
Yeah.
we sometimes just have to be okay with, like when you realize, and everybody has that feeling, mine is
Hmm.
in my gut, maybe yours is like in your head. Shoot, maybe
Yep.
somebody's is in their arm. They're kind of like, man, how do I always have this pain when I'm here? I think you just have
Yeah.
to like be in tune with like when something isn't right. And life is too short, like literally, life is too short to stay in situations where you feel like you're just not, it's not right for you.
Hmm.
Um, then on the other side, man, the times where I felt like, oh, this is a perfect fit, it may not have always been, right? But the
Hmm.
times that I felt like it was a perfect fit, everything just kind of aligned.
Yeah.
And what's so crazy, I think I haven't had a perfect fit in a long time, aside from when
Hmm.
I launched this business that I now have.
Yeah.
But so it's, just in all honesty, it's probably been a good 10 years since I've really been in that space that you're talking about. But I
Hmm.
know what it feels like. And I've been really just moving through the world like, all right, I'm not going to stay where I am until I feel this again. Right.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I've just been a little bit off of like, what the heck am I doing here? The last
Yeah.
time that I felt that was probably in New York City. And that was
Hmm.
over 12 years ago.
Yeah.
I was in a position where I was just like, oh, this is the one, and it just felt good. Can't really describe it. You just have that feeling where like, this is exactly where I'm supposed to be right
Yeah. Well, it's such an ambiguous feeling too, right? Which I think is what makes it so difficult for most people to go after that. And I'm gonna create a little bit of a generalization. So if
now.
you're listening to this, please challenge me on this.
Yeah.
I feel a lot of times creatives may be better equipped for that than and I think everybody's creative, by the way. It's just what we label ourselves, right? So if you're like, I'm an artist, I'm a musician, I'm a whatever, versus like, I'm somebody who doesn't do those things. I feel like creatives are better suited to that because the nature of the profession is rooted in ambiguity.
Mhm.
Um, but even in those scenarios where you're realizing that you're not fitting the way that you think that you would, I think there's utility in that because as you had mentioned, your body begins to feel and you begin to internalize what it feels like to be out of sync. So you may have this preconceived notion going into a scenario like, yeah, this is going to fit very well because this is what I think it's going to be.
Yeah.
But then whether or not you start paying attention to like that muscle memory that you get, that feeling in the pit of your stomach, or like for me, it's I stopped creating, I stopped writing, I stopped
Mhm.
making music, things like that, because I'm so emotionally drained. Um, do you start feeling and remembering that? And then when you move on to something else, does that feeling remain or does it evaporate? And do you feel something else?
For me personally, there's always a little bit of that remains. It's kind of like the scars that make us who
Yeah.
we are.
Hmm.
I think
Yeah.
even if we're talking about business, but you think about just life. It's like if
Hmm.
you had this relationship that you thought was everything. And then
Yeah.
you look up one day and you're like, how in the heck did we get here?
Yeah.
This is all falling apart. You
Yeah.
leave that relationship and you're like, ah, but there's always that little piece of your heart that was just like, just a little scar, you know?
Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
and of course, scars can be healed, but there's always something there that was a bit different than it was before.
Yeah.
I think that's just a part of life, but it's also really beautiful as long
Hmm.
as we realize that that is a part of life. We don't look at that as
Yep.
just like, oh man, I failed, or to
Yeah.
me, I'm like, okay, I don't know about a failure. To me, look at it as a learning lesson of something that you learned
Yeah.
about yourself, something
Hmm.
that you potentially learned about the person you want to be. If it was a really horrible boss that, made your days miserable, you can't
Hmm.
control that person, but you can darn sure control how you show up in the world. So when you have an opportunity to be a leader, what type of leader are you going to be? Are you going to take on those
Yeah.
same traits? Or are you going to be someone different? So I think it's always there. I think the thing that makes us successful or oddly successful, haha, is to really just to look at those things as like, all right, what did I learn from this? And
Hmm.
take that as a piece of you and keep on moving on. That's all we can do because it's going to stick
Yeah.
sometimes for sure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I remember one of the greatest lessons. So when I was teaching jujitsu, my instructor, we had this move that pretty much they called it giant killer. It was a version of a chokehold, but when someone's like pushing on top of you and you're on the bottom of the fight. And this could be like a 300-pound linebacker.
Wow.
And I am not a 300-pound linebacker. And I remember the first time I'm doing this move, right? I promise this ties in, everybody.
Okay.
The first time I'm doing this move, like I'm trying to like wrap my legs around this guy and like pull him down with my legs, but he's so freaking strong.
Mhm.
And my instructor at the time, Sonny, comes over and he's like, is it going to be easier to move that person, or is it going to be easier to move yourself?
Mm.
And I'm like, oh. So I like put my foot on his hip and scooched my hips out. And then he was perfectly aligned for me to do the thing that I needed to do.
Wow.
Right. And sometimes, as you were saying, is like, sometimes it's going to be easier to move yourself than to move your environment. And there's a lot of humility in that too, because we all want to be strong and to just power through it, but you got to be smart about it too.
Absolutely. I'll tell you some of the things. If you are one of those who is in alignment with the universe, I'm a very spiritual person and I believe that like words have power and all those things. And I believe that even more the older that the more wise I've become. And,
Mhm.
I'll tell you, sometimes the things that we look at as like negatives, I mean, they feel like somebody threw a brick at you. You feel like you
Yeah.
just got hit by like a mini truck. But
Hmm.
typically, mostly, you will realize that like, oh, that was for a reason. Like I either got
Yeah.
something or I was able to move into something that was better for me, or I learned
Hmm.
a lot about myself and others. So I think we just have to look at that as like, yes, sometimes life will hit you upside your head like a
Hmm.
bag of bricks. And once the pain goes away, it's just kind of look at that as a reminder of like, all right, what did I do in that situation that caused that? Let me
Hmm.
move forward, not doing that again, or doing my best not to get in that situation again. That is all we can do because you're going
Yeah.
to get hit by a bag of bricks at some point in your life, probably more than once.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I mean, that shows the utility of pain, right? Because
yeah.
if we didn't feel that pain, we'd probably end up making the same mistake over and over
Over
again.
and over
So
again,
yeah.
over and over again. My goodness.
So, it sounds like you'd made your way through a lot of ups and downs in your professional career,
Mhm.
but, how did that translate over? You'd mentioned like one of your great successes as well is being a wife and a mother of two kids. I mean, how did those lessons apply to your home life or vice versa?
Whoa. All right. So anyone who's a parent out there can give me a air high five on this. It is one of the hardest jobs. Okay.
Yeah.
No one teaches you this. I mean, I think about how you have to go through all these tests to get through college and be certified to do some job, like be a doctor. You have to, in order to get a driver's license, you got to go through all these tests. In order to be a parent, all you do is have to have some fun and, and
Hmm.
produce, right?
Yeah.
And then you're left with these two human beings and your entire life changes. So I don't think I was really ever ready for this wonderful job of parenting. I would say that just the growth in myself and the things that I've been through and kind of realizing that like I've made mistakes and I'm okay. I think the biggest thing is like, 'cause these are human beings who are just not always doing the right things and not always saying the right things. And I think for me, it's just knowing that like all right, they're human beings, they've got their own minds, they've got their own feelings, they've got their own struggles. So even though I'm teaching them all the right things to do, they've got to process this stuff on their own. And I don't know how they're seeing the world and how they're processing what's going on in the world. So I can't really say yes, it's my greatest success, my greatest gift, just because I know how much of a blessing it is. We all want to be loved and be seen and heard. And I have people who are loving me, seeing and hearing me every single day, so it's a wonderful, beautiful thing. In tandem with my career, there was something that happened just recently. And I was talking to my husband, who was with a group of folks who are very high level people. And they were all talking about just their careers. And one of them was talking about how successful she is. Now, I'll tell you, I think I've been very successful, but we always feel like we should be a little bit further than we are.
Yep. Yeah. Yep.
So I've always felt like, oh, I should be making this amount of money or doing this, or I should be living here, owning these businesses. And there was something that I learned from that conversation where it was just like, we always feel like we want to be somewhere that we're not. But when you get wherever that is, there's different circumstances that come with that situation. So let's just say I became this big executive, this CEO of a company. Would I have been able to be as present with my children? Would my marriage, would the ebbs and flows of my marriage, would I have survived them if I was always traveling and always moving? So I think, when I think about success where my children are concerned, I think the biggest thing is I have been able to have a career that hasn't impacted my being able to be there for my children. I am at every soccer game. I am at every dance recital. I am at every school event. I am present, and I am there for my husband whenever he needs me to be as well. And that to me is what gives me the most joy.
Yeah, I mean, I think an analogy that we've made before is you have the financial success, right?
Yeah.
The career success, right? From here to here, right? And maybe being that executive flying all over the world is up here, but that tends to be the success that we really only talk about,
right?
Primarily. But what of being present for your kids, or being present for your spouse, or being present for your friends, or the mental health and the fulfilling of purpose? And maybe there's some people that can have the purpose and the CEO thing. That's great.
Yeah.
But that is taking away from the family stuff. So is it worth giving a little bit here to get so much here? And yeah, I mean, it sounds like,
yeah. And for me, right? Because some people are like, no, I am the lead person in this company, and that is everything to me. And my children understand that. Like, this is, again, no judgment on people's past. I think for me personally, I did feel like, oh, I should be someone's chief marketing officer. And I was on that track. And then I had a second child. And I realized I was just like, oh, man, these two things aren't working together. And there were a lot of women that I was working with who didn't have children. They kind of gave that up in order to be able to have the careers. So I feel like I had to start thinking about it differently. So I felt good about my situation as well. Because again, we talk about not every moment you're like, oh, this is perfect, the situation I'm in. There were times where I wanted to be in that executive seat, doing these huge things and traveling the world. And then I was like, but I would be giving something up on the side. My children would have to have a nanny. They would be seeing me less. I'd be the one that's calling them from a plane, putting them to sleep on the phone. And I realized, for me personally, I don't know about you, but I know that the thing that I remember about my parents the most was not like, oh, my daddy worked so hard and made all this money and we lived in this big house. My dad was there. Like, literally, I'm talking about even through college, my mom and my dad were always in the audience. Always. I don't remember a time where it wasn't both of them. Even when they divorced, they were still in the audience.
Yep. Yeah.
That's important to me.
I feel very fortunate as a kid. My parents were the same way. They were always there for whatever, whether it was a graduation or one of the sporting events. It's funny, on a random note. So my dad used to, when I was a kid, he had Barry Manilow's album that had Mandy on it.
Mm-hmm.
And so he'd always he'd be in the shower and I'm literally sitting outside watching Ren and Stimpy or something. I was a kid. He'd be like, "Whoa, AJ, you can," and replace my names, which is such a weird song to do that with. But anyway, so I heard this punk band do a cover of Barry Manilow's Mandy,
Mm-hmm.
and I sent it over to my dad. I'm like, "Hey, I think they got the lyrics wrong." And so we had met. My dad lives in Pennsylvania. I'm in Virginia. We met 2 months later, and he's like, my dad is not an emotional guy, so I'm sorry. I'm gonna share this with the world with you, Dad. But he started tearing because I was like, out of all the times you were down in Virginia or New Jersey, sometimes I wonder if you forgot me, but I'm glad there's something that I did that stuck. And it that's awesome. That's success.
Yeah.
That is success for a lot of people,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's nice.
So, yeah. So anyway, you sharing that, it's just yeah, it's so great to be present because, for a lot of folks like you, that determines success.
Yeah. For me, it does. I can't speak for anybody else, but, and again, it took me some time to get there because in my mind, I'm like, but I should be doing this. And I'm like, what if I was doing that? I wouldn't be able to do this.
Yeah.
Sometimes you got to check yourself and be really proud about where you are because it might be more beautiful than where you think you should be.
Yeah. Well, it's you're underneath that 300-pound linebacker and you're struggling, you're pushing, you want them to go over here, but it's there's another way to be in a peaceful spot.
Yeah.
I have to move myself a little bit. And when you do, you're like, I'm great.
Yeah.
Now I can choke out life. Mm-hmm. It's all good.
Yeah. As long as we can control ourselves,
Yeah.
There's power in that.
Yeah. So, you'd mentioned earlier that you have now a brand and marketing consultancy, after the very colorful career that you've had. What prompted you to strike out on your own as an entrepreneur?
So I have owned 2 companies before. As part of the colorful career, 3 of my girlfriends from college and we owned an event production company. Mm-hmm. And that unfortunately folded on 9/11. We were one of those who was traveling to one of the events that we had on 9/11. And then the planes hit and we were evacuated off of the plane and out of LaGuardia Airport in New York City.
Wow.
So we were very fortunate. We didn't lose anyone. We didn't lose any employees. We didn't lose any friends or family. But that was the year that 7th on 6 Fashion Week was actually canceled because of that in New York City. And we had a lot of huge things happening. We were actually creating the first all-Black fashion show with all urban designers. I mean, it's one of those things when you talk about it would have been big. And
yeah,
but it never happened, so this you look back and you're like, oh man, what if that happened? Where would I be? It didn't happen. I can't change the past. So unfortunately that company dissolved. We all had to go back to work. And then years later, I had a wedding planning company on my own. I was planning an event in Puerto Rico. I was 7 months pregnant. And I was just like, okay, I think I'm going to have to put down my event planning hat for a while because it was just physically anyone out here who's listening, who's an event planner, people think it's just glamorous. It is hard labor. Okay. It is truly a lot of schlepping and it looks beautiful and glamorous, but it's not. No, it is, but it's a lot of work. But so fast forward, I've had 2 companies. So I've got this entrepreneurial bug that just lives in me. Both of my brothers are entrepreneurs, it's just something that has been in us. And I like to tell, I like to listen to that voice in me, even sometimes it's yelling at me. Sometimes it's not. I went back to work mainly because my husband and I were both in sales and it was just difficult. And we had 2 mouths to feed, and our children. So, but it was when I was in my last full-time job, a job that I really enjoyed. It was just, again, and we were talking about just not that perfect fit. Yeah. And next thing I know, I'm, back out in the world. And it was really just what are you going to do? Are you going to do what you feel is safe and go get another full-time job, even though that's not what you're supposed to be doing? Or are you going to truly create this life you desire? And I decided to step out on faith. And when I tell you, when you put energy into something and when you lean into your fears, and I know it's cliche, people, like, we've heard so many things like, magic is on the other side of fear, magic is on the other side of that. But that is what I have done, is just let me push through this fear. And for me, it was just leaning into what I knew I was supposed to be doing. By the way, I
Mm,
was already doing it. I've been consulting for people for a
mm,
long time. I've been doing
yeah,
this for a long time, but in my mind, I was just helping people out. I was kind of working freelance. And I was like, no, I'm now going to make this official and formal and let the world know that I'm doing it. And it's been wonderful.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
How have for a lot of people, myself included, the idea of starting a business, right, is I think so many people have toyed with the idea, but you know, starting to get clients from that. What were some of the steps that you had taken either in this business or some of your previous business where it's like, hey, I've got this idea. It is launched. I have a business, but I need to get from that 0 to 1. I need to get that first sale. I got to meet that first customer. What has that journey been like for you? Because you've had success with that in the past.
It's been very different this time around, and I'll tell you that. Okay. So
Hmm.
my other two companies, I was in New York City, and to be very honest with you, I was just more connected there. Right. It was just a different
Yeah.
life.
Hmm.
In New York, you leave the office, you go for drinks right after. And of course, I didn't have kids then. So it was just different. Right. So I
Yeah.
was always, always, always talking to people. And it felt like every conversation was a business conversation, even though it wasn't. That was
Yeah.
a really cool thing about New York City, is they were just, everybody was doing such cool things. Even if you were just hanging out and having drinks, it turned into like this think tank session. Right.
Yeah.
So this one has been different because I'm now in
Mhm.
Richmond, and even though I work with companies all across the United States and haven't done anything overseas yet, but I don't have any clients in Virginia. Right now, I'm tapping
Mhm.
into really just who I know elsewhere, and I'm kind of more connected in New York City still.
Yeah.
But I would say for me, you really just have to be okay learning as you're going along. You're not going to know
Mhm.
everything. I mean, it's just
Yeah.
because we've never done everything. If you worked for a company before, you weren't the CEO, you weren't the finance guy, you weren't the creative director. But in this position, you have to be all those things.
Yeah.
Something that I've done is I've leaned into these wonderful tools called Fiverr, where I've been
Mhm.
able to hire people that if there was a part of building the business that was stopping me from moving forward, I've been telling myself, Shannon, get out of your own way. And yeah, you're a little
Mhm.
bit nervous because it's like, oh, I'm not making money yet. How the heck can I spend money? But you got to invest in yourself. And I think that's
Yeah.
something as business owners, when you're building a business, you have to remember I am for the first time investing in myself. And so if
Mm.
I've got to spend a little bit of money, think big, believe big. You know that it's going to come back to you tenfold, but you've got to
Yeah.
invest in yourself. And anything that's stopping you from moving forward, put your resources into finding someone who can do the work. And that's really
Yeah.
what it's done for me. So I've hired different people. I hired a friend of mine to build the website. It was really for me just like, okay, you can take 6 weeks to figure this out on your own, or you can pay it forward and hire people to get some of these things done. That was
Yeah.
number one. Number two was, man, if I can find this, I'm going to send it to you, Alex. There was something I saw on Instagram, and I don't know who this man was, but he had some like Australian really cool accent, right? But what he was saying was, talking to your friends about the thing is not doing the thing. Um,
Mm.
Thinking about the thing is not doing the thing. Researching the thing is not doing the thing. Planning the thing is not doing the thing. Talking about the thing over and over again is not doing the thing. Going to a conference to learn about the thing is not doing the thing. And he went on and on and on and on.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you are someone who's thinking, man, I want to launch a business, the best way to launch a business is to get off your butt and do it.
Yeah.
That's really because then you're going to learn, and it's scary because you're going to be doing things that you don't know how to do. But there are so many resources. Now you go back to social media, how it's so powerful. There are
Mhm.
so many resources out there to learn how to do things we don't know how to do. Use Chat GPT and put in how I build this business. Let it tell you what the steps are to do it. And then don't
Yeah.
just do the thing of, doing the research. Put the work in, and again, that universe will speak to you and respond. And in
Yeah.
most cases, you respond by getting exactly what you asked for.
Well, as somebody who is looking like starting to get into music production now where I'm at, because I'm striking out on my own here. I'm like, let me do the podcast, let me write a book, let me do the music production, let me just see in this creative space
Mm-hmm.
what is drawing to me. Like that's the first step for me, because I don't know, it's been a while since I started a business. But I remember recently I was working with somebody and they're like, hey, can you create some background music for like a social media track? I'm like, sure, like that shouldn't take me too long. And then they sent me some samples as to what they wanted. And it was like this crazy EDM dubstep stuff, right? Which I can make. I've made it before, but it takes me a couple of hours to put something together. And I was like, well, I'm going to charge them for like 30 minutes of work because that's how long that I thought that it was.
Mm-hmm.
So then I was like, all right, well, I don't want to run into this again. Either I say like, hey, this is going to cost more, or I figure out how to do it faster. So then it's like, all right, how to create EDM tracks, like workflow. And now it's like, all right, get some presets saved. So now I can produce them in 30 minutes. And it's, I think where I'm trying to get is when you start this journey, It is so broad, everything that you can learn and everything that you can dive into. And like, get the high level stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then you do have to go out and then you're going to run into a blocker. And the great thing that we have is that's when you can learn about it, when you realize that it's a problem.
Yes.
And you only have to learn about it once and then you use it. And then you run into another blocker. And before you know it, you do that 5, 10, 20 times.
You're an expert.
Holy crap, you're an expert now,
Really. And I want to share. So I've been really, really lucky to have conversations with some really amazing people who have just taken their time to sit down with me and share their good and bad things that they've learned through developing businesses or starting businesses, going back to work, whatever it was. And there were two pieces of advice that really helped me. Number one, it was just, first of all, you have to get started, right? It's just like get started. And when you get started, tell everybody you know. And it's just one of those things where I think there's this probably fear that we may have. It's just like, all right, am I really doing this? If I don't tell anybody, if it fails, nobody will know. But if you don't tell anybody, how will people know to support you, right? So I think you have to sometimes, when I say get out of your own way, number one, when you finally are in the point to do that thing, tell everyone you know, because even though that person that you're talking to, you may not think that they need your music production, but they may know someone who does, or in 2 weeks, they may be in a conversation with someone who's asking about this. And now they know that Alex is doing this, right?
Yeah.
The second piece was, and of course, I'm probably going to have a brain fart right here, so you're probably going to have to love this one. But the second piece, give me a second, because it was like I literally had it on the tip of my tongue, and I wanted to come back because it was really, really good. Got it. The second piece of advice was about payment, and this is always that piece that I think people are a little bit nervous, like, all right, well, I haven't done this enough, or I'm young. People are, I have to bring my price down. I was talking to this life coach. Matter of fact, someone who you were connected to that I saw on Instagram. I mean, on LinkedIn with you. I'm going to think of her name in a minute, but
okay.
She posted all these really positive things, and I had a call with her.
Okay.
Something that she said in building her business, which she built like over the last 5 years. And she was also in corporate America and was just like, I'm over this and I want to do thing, right? And if you're it's just like, man, I'm tired of working for someone else. Again, for those who are working for people and love it, great. But if you're one of those who are just like, I'm ready to have my own thing, what is it? This was that other piece of advice that was so valuable to me. I was just like, how do I price myself? I don't want to overprice because I'm not competitive yet. And she's like, why are you not competitive yet? It's not, you're building a business off of skill set that you have. You've been doing what you've been doing for over 20 years. So why aren't you competitive? She said, one thing about me is I set my price and I don't waver on that. And she said, it's very important that now it's different if you are working with a company that you really believe in and you want to help them and you decide, you know what, I'm going to give you a discounted rate. But do the research, set your price, and don't waver. And I said only two, but there was one more that was really important to me. And it was really just a lot of times we think about, in order for me to get business, I need to do everything. I need to make it very broad Something else, some other advice that I was given is we've got to be very specific. We've got to know who our audience is, and we've got to know what product we're offering. And we can't say, oh, I offer this product and this one and this one and this one and this one and this one. Oh, I do it all. Because then people are confused. And when you're having these conversations with everyone, think about how more powerful the conversations will be if you are able to say, this is the audience I serve. This is what I provide. So if you know anyone or if you meet anyone who fits this, please let me know, because then they know exactly what you're looking for. They're now not like, oh, wait, okay, so any marketing, right? It's more so, no, I am a brand expert who helps all types of companies all over the world if they need to refresh their brand, if they need to reinvent their brand, or if they need to grow their brand. And this is what that looks like. And give them a very specific example of that instead of feeling like you need to offer everything. Oh, I do events, I do marketing, I do brand development, I do websites. Now, they come with that, but you want to lead with a very specific offer. And those are the three things that it just helped me to feel more confident in my approach in getting started. And those are things that I'm literally have implemented into like how I live today. They were so good here.
Well, it's like, I think about like on a similar note, if I wanted to get a cup of coffee, I could go to Walmart, which sells coffee, or I could go to Starbucks, or I could go to a local cafe, depending on where you're at with the chains or local, but that's regardless. I can go to Walmart or I can go to a cafe, right? Yes. And people are going to be like, oh, well, yeah, I want to go to a cafe to get coffee. Well, the coffee at Walmart's cheaper. You can get a cup of coffee at Walmart for like 99 cents versus Starbucks. It's like $6.
Right.
Now, I'll still go to Starbucks, right? Because that's what they do. That's the thing. That's the promise that they're making. And even on the concept of payment. So I went to school for art. I was an art student. I did like 3D modeling and things like that. And one of the biggest ahas that I had in the entrepreneurship classes that they had us teaching was, artists are consistently underpaid for the work that they do.
Right.
And I mean, like, to create a painting or a model or things like that can take 20 to 40 to 60 hours worth of work. It's insane.
And you're getting paid how much of that?
Like, if you're a freelancer student, a lot of these students will be like, yeah, I'll make you like a model for $80.
Wow.
For 60 hours of work.
Wow.
Which is like, you're getting paid a
dime?
$1.50 maybe, like $1.25.
Yeah.
That's how much. And like, it didn't
my
click.
But off. So thank you for, like an hour.
But you think about it, right? Like, if you are an artist who has expertise, and maybe you're not super professional, but if you're charging that much, what does it do to the other artists in your community? Because now you set an expectation, and it's a race to the bottom, right? And hearing that was like, wow, like, I'm sitting here thinking maybe I'm not good enough, but that insecurity that I have for myself spreads to other people.
Sure does.
It is not benign at all. I am not the only one who suffers from it. And when I heard that, I was like, you have a responsibility to charge fairly.
Yeah.
Because even if they don't go with you, they're going to go to somebody else. And eventually they're going to have to hit a wall and be like, you know what? I guess this 60-hour model is going to cost me $1,000.
What's the saying? You get what you pay for. And I'm a firm believer you really do. You know, so it's one of those things where it's just like, if you need to be budget friendly, you're going to go somewhere. But most of the time, you're like, probably should have spent a little more money because this was wrong or that was wrong. I think we have to be confident. If you're building a business, you're not building a business doing something that you know nothing about, right?
Right.
Typically, matter of fact, let's say, even if you are like, okay, I want to build an e-commerce business. I've never built an e-commerce business. However, the things that I'm selling, I know a lot about. So there's usually some knowledge in what it is we're doing. I think we just have to remember, it's like, we are experts in this. And how do we present ourselves authentically to other human beings who need this from us? And we have to price ourselves accordingly. And, maybe as you grow, your price grows. but don't underprice yourself, because you have to remember that. And sometimes we have to be okay to say no, because if you get this client that's just kind of like, hey, I understand your fee is $10,000 a month, but I only have 1,000. I mean, you need to be okay to really stand on your own 2 feet and say, I'm probably not the right person for you. However, I do know someone who's just getting started. Would you like me to introduce you to them?
Yep.
You know,
Yeah. And that's, I had a call with a coach recently, and they were like, my budget was $1,200 for their service, and like, I charge $1,500, and I was like, well, I think I'll pause the call here because my budget's $1,200, but and I used to work with coaches in one of my older business. Like, I understand, like, that's how much you are worth. I just may not be it for you. And so, like, it doesn't have to be an acrimonious conversation, right? You don't have to, like, it's okay to have boundaries. It's fine. Yeah.
having boundaries is love.
Yeah.
When you say, all the things that I've learned, oh man, throughout my life, having boundaries has helped my mental health.
Mhm.
It has helped my relationships. It has helped my own confidence, my self-worth. I mean, boundaries, I would probably say, is one of the number one things we all need to find, is just like having boundaries, being able to say, I don't know, or no. Very powerful.
Yeah. 100%.
Very powerful.
Well, I know we're getting close to the hour. I want to make sure that we have enough time to promote some of the services that you have. I know we just talked about your business that you're having, but let's talk about the business that you're starting. One, what are some of the things that you're doing with that, and then where can people reach you?
So my website is the Godfrey-Johnson Group.com, the Godfrey-Johnson Group.com. And it's a consulting business. So really what I do is I focus on the brand. And a lot of people, what I've seen working in different companies, and I've worked for companies like Reader's Digest, Condé Nast, Essence Magazine, Time Warner, Time Inc. So I've worked for a lot of large media companies. And in those times, they were very aware of their brand. As I've moved into different industries and worked in different industries, I've seen that sometimes the brand is lost. They have a great product, they have a great logo, they have a lot of wonderful things, but the brand just seems to be a bit disconnected in the voice and tone and the look and feel, and it being just a thread throughout the organization. And that's something that I saw was just something that I needed to bring to people, because that is a piece of what I've done my entire career. Even when I look back at my event planning career, we were really helping brands to have a voice and to build a presence, right? So brand directors have become more, we've talked about them more over the years, but it's something that I've always done. So what I do is I work with companies, small and large companies of all types. Right now, one of the companies I'm working with is a health company. I have another one that is actually another health and wellness company. She's a very small business, but different sizes. One is a one-person owner. Another has 1,500 employees, right?
Wow.
But even with the company that is very large, they have had a bit of problem with their brand. And it's just, they have been so focused on their products. Now they realize, oh, we don't even know how to speak about who we are. We don't know how to communicate to who our audience. Oh, by the way, who is our audience? So it's just, they're trying to now kind of do a rewind in just what we need to do in order to really present our brand and define who our audience is. So that's what I do. I come in and I provide strategy. I consult. I provide solutions. And then I also partner with an agency, a marketing and branding agency. So let's just say that you have a gap that needs to be filled. I'll come in and I'll fill that gap, and may bring in a team of people if you don't have those tactical people at your organization to do those things. And then once it's done, I either leave or I stay on as a consultant just to make sure that it's being, managed better.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so one thing I think for a lot of people, and you had done such a good job sharing this with me beforehand, but I think the idea of a brand can get conflated with like a logo or advertising, but it is its own separate entity. I think it can be a little bit more amorphous. In your own words, what is the purpose of a brand in a company, and how does it help that company succeed?
So for me, I wrote an article on LinkedIn, and it was from my way of kind of getting what was in my head on paper. But
Mm-hmm.
a brand is so many different things, and people can describe it in so many different ways. The way that I would describe it is that it is really how your audience member, how your audience identifies with who you are. Okay.
Mm.
And so it truly is your personality and what they become loyal to, right?
Mm.
So it can be all these different ways that we communicate. That's why the brand has to be through the thread of an organization. It has to be through the thread of your social media. It has to be through the thread of your content. It has to be through the thread of your creative, right? It has to be through the thread of how you look and how you feel, how your thought leaders are out talking about this organization. And then your customer service, right? So there's all these different pieces, and it's truly the personality. Are we showing up as this brand wherever we are? Are we talking about it in the same way? Are
Mm-hmm.
when people think about oddly successful, what do they think? Like what do they think about this? What do they think about the host? How does it make them feel? That's truly your brand,
Mm.
and then from that, if you make people feel a way that they want to come back, you create brand loyalty through that
Mm.
awareness and through that, that feeling. So the brand is truly just it's your organization. It's how your organization shows up to the public in so many different ways,
Yeah.
and what the public responds to and what creates loyalty between you and your audience.
Awesome. Well, that's a great explanation.
Well,
I think that that brings a lot of clarity. So again, they can find your consultancy at the Godfrey-Johnson Group.com.
right. And then if you want to see me on social media, I'll be very honest with you. I'm one of those on social media. You're going to be seeing posts about just my life because I like to
Yeah,
just kind of be my authentic self there. But on Instagram,
as you
I
should.
am the real Shannon GJ, the real Shannon
Okay.
GJ on Instagram.
Awesome. And then on LinkedIn as well, you have a LinkedIn, which is
Shannon
Shannon
GJ.
GJ as well.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Sweet. Well,
It's been
that,
fun. I appreciate you.
yeah, thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you for sharing everything that you shared. Just the ups, the downs, the value of being true to yourself, and really how that pans out, and also what it feels like not to be yourself. Because again, having and again, I call it purposeful pain. Having that purposeful pain of knowing what it feels like and not to be in your shoes gives you a context for what it feels like to be in the place that you need to be. And
Yeah.
I think that's something that maybe not a lot of people feel sometimes or are aware of.
Yeah. Yeah. Something we got to work through.
Well,
But I appreciate you. This has
yeah.
been great fun. Thank you for letting me talk about my life.
You bet. Well, thank you. Thank you for coming on. And thank you, everybody, for listening to this episode of Oddly Successful. If you enjoyed the show, please consider leaving us a review because, again, as I always mention, doing so allows this show to reach the people who may need to hear Shannon's story and have that resonate with them to give them the courage to take the steps that they need to do to perhaps live how they feel authentic. So if you found value in this, please leave us a review. And thank you again for listening. And until next time, stay weird.
It's weird.